interesting answer that the Lord gives to this query of the Pharisees. Why do your disciples not fast when ours do? And he says, can the wedding guests mourn while the bridegroom is still with them? You recall, and it's particularly in St. Paul, but our Lord also uses the analogy of the church as the bride and himself, Christ, as the bridegroom. And that is what our Lord is referring to here. I repeat, it is one of St. Paul's favorite themes. But in any case, our Lord answers because here he is there among them, he the bridegroom. Do you fast when you have the bridegroom with you and the feast is going on, the wedding celebration? You wouldn't fast then. We celebrate. We don't fast on those occasions. So our Lord is saying, no, then we don't fast. They aren't fasting because he's still right there with them. But then note what he adds. A time will come when the bridegroom will no longer be with them, and they will fast. Of course, he left them with his passion and death. And then, actually, they went into hiding. They weren't seen. Then they did fast. We have to go a little bit further to understand exactly what is going on here and why we bring up this theme, fasting, penance, sacrifice. And yet that is exactly the theme we reflect on now that we have begun Lent. We, of course, look forward, we recall our Lord's passion and death. The very suffering that he offered for all of us, the sublime sacrifice of the cross. And that is why we continue to abstain from meat on Fridays during Lent. A good practice to continue every Friday to remind ourselves of that very great sacrifice that our Lord made for us and that took place on a Friday, Good Friday. But we continue also that theme, fasting and suffering and penance. It has a very good reason. Right? It's not arbitrary. Because not that our Lord is no longer with us. The bridegroom is still with us. Our Lord is still with us in the Eucharist, in the Blessed Sacrament, which is the very continuation of that same sacrifice of the cross. The sacrifice of the Mass is the sacrifice of the cross. So it is not that our Lord is not with us, he is, just as he promised he would be till the end of time. But we have need of the fasting in the different ways to fast. It doesn't necessarily mean exclusively not eating. That can be a part of it, and it may be a good thing for many of us, not everyone necessarily, but what we refer to here with penance and suffering and sacrifice is a necessity because of the one thing that keeps us from being totally consumed in our love for God, totally devoted to him. And that one thing is sin. And we all fall into it. Perhaps even every day. I believe it's St. Augustine who says we fall 7 times a day. So we fall. And so we have need to make that conversion, that turnaround, to turn around from sin and turn back to Christ, to the following of Christ. That's why we need the penance, the sacrifice, to mortify ourselves, to purify ourselves, to sanctify ourselves, to grow closer to our love for Christ. That's why we need the penance and the sacrifice. And our pity can take on different forms because, of course, we have different vices we fall into, different sins we fall into. Now, when we speak here of vices and sins, it's the bad habits we fall into that pull us away. And so we have to force ourselves, as it were, to practice the opposite virtues. We tend to be impatient, we tend to get angry, and now we have to be meek. We have to seek to be meek, we have to seek to be patient. But it's something we have to do to ourselves in order to achieve that goal. We have to give up something of ourselves. And again, I repeat, that can take on many different forms. We have to look at ourselves We should examine ourselves each day. What particular habit do I have that I fall into that I need to turn away from? And what virtue do I have to practice in order to begin the virtue, by the way, is the good habit that I have, so I can start making that a good habit, so that I am growing closer to God. Ultimately, that's the whole thing, is to grow closer to God. So we have to look at ourselves now. How can I do that? What virtues can I practice? What can I do to make sure I'm growing closer to God? How can I do that each day? And that's how that would be the subject of our meditation each day. How can I grow closer to God? How can I be more consumed in His love each day? A little bit each day. What sacrifice can I make to go closer to Him? To turn away from whatever sins, whatever vices I fall into. Now, mind you, if the vices are vices of doubts of faith or impurity, there are no opposite virtues. Here we have to run from the occasions. We just have to run and pray for the grace to stay away from them. And with that grace, then we can accomplish it. As hard as it may be, we can accomplish it. Because you see, then we're asking for the help of God directly. And with God, all things are possible. He will help us. But He's waiting for us to say, I choose it. I want you, Lord. I want to love you. I want to grow ever closer to you. Let us make that choice each day. Let us grow with our penances, our mortifications, with our sacrifices, to grow ever closer to God, to love Him more and more each day. Praise be Jesus, Savior.